9-year-old Klaus thought his father managed a work camp where people wore striped pajamas until he befriended David through the fence and discovered some friendships can survive even the darkest places. Welcome to Vaulted Secrets. Before we begin this story of unlikely friendship, childhood innocence, and the moment when a boy's curiosity led to an unbreakable bond, tell me in the comments, have you ever made a friend in the most unexpected place? And if you believe stories of human connection must never be forgotten, hit that subscribe button. This story will show you that sometimes the strongest friendships are formed through the smallest gaps. Klaus Weber was 9 years old when his family moved from their comfortable apartment in Munich to what the adults called the Eastern Assignment. His father, Commandant Heinrich Weber, had been selected for an important position overseeing what Klaus was told was a large work facility, where people made supplies for the war effort. The new house was impressive, much larger than their Munich home, with a wraparound porch and gardens that seemed to stretch forever. But Klaus noticed strange things about their new location. The workers who lived in the facility beyond their fence all seemed to wear the same clothes, striped pajamas that looked like the ones Klaus wore to bed. Except these people wore them during the day. Why do the workers wear pajamas all the time? Klaus asked his mother, as she arranged flowers in their new dining room. Those aren't pajamas, Klaus's mother replied, not looking up from her arrangement. They're work uniforms. Special clothes that help identify the different groups of workers. Klaus found this explanation unsatisfying. The uniforms looked exactly like pajamas to him, the same striped pattern, the same loose fit, and why did everyone need to be identified? In Munich, workers wore different clothes depending on their jobs, but they all looked like regular people. From his bedroom window on the second floor, Klaus could see the entire work facility. Rows of long, low buildings housed the workers, and during the day, Klaus could see them moving between buildings in organized groups. They always walked in straight lines, always moved slowly, and Klaus never saw any of them smile or wave the way workers usually did. Klaus's sister Ingrid, who was 13 and thought she knew everything, had made friends with the daughters of other German officers stationed nearby. They spent their time studying maps and talking about something called racial science that sounded incredibly boring. Klaus tried to join their conversations, but they always shooed him away, saying he was too young to understand important matters. Father was busier than he had ever been in Munich. He left early each morning wearing his crisp uniform and returned late at night looking tired and sometimes troubled. When Klaus asked about his work, Father would say only that it was necessary for the war effort and not suitable for children to discuss. Klaus was desperately bored. There were no neighborhood children to play with, no parks or playgrounds nearby, and certainly no friends his age among the German families at the facility. The workers in striped pajamas were the only people Klaus saw regularly, but he had been strictly forbidden from approaching the fence that separated their house from the work area. The work zone is dangerous for children, Father had explained. There are areas where you must never go, machinery that could hurt you, and work schedules that must not be interrupted. But Klaus was 9 years old, and telling a 9-year-old not to explore something only made it more interesting. It was during his second week at Sobibor that Klaus discovered the garden shed behind their house contained more than just tools. Hidden behind old equipment, he found a loose board that created a perfect passage to the area beyond their immediate garden. If he squeezed through carefully, he could slip out without anyone noticing. Klaus knew he wasn't supposed to explore near the work facility, but he reasoned that walking along the outer fence wouldn't actually violate Father's rules. The fence was very tall and topped with wire that looked sharp, but there seemed to be nothing dangerous about walking on the outside of it. For several days, Klaus took secret walks along the perimeter fence, staying hidden among the trees that grew close to the wire. He observed the workers in their striped pajamas, how they moved in groups, how they carried things between buildings, how they stood in long lines for what appeared to be meal distribution. Klaus noticed that the workers never seemed to laugh or talk casually the way people did in Munich. They moved efficiently but without joy, completing their tasks but never appearing satisfied or proud of their work. Perhaps this was just how people worked in eastern Poland. Klaus didn't know enough about regional work customs to be sure. It was during his fifth secret exploration that Klaus saw the boy who would change his life forever. The boy was sitting on the ground near the fence, approximately Klaus's age but noticeably thinner. He wore the same striped pajamas as all the workers, but his were clearly too large for his small frame. His hair was very short, shorter than any boy's haircut Klaus had ever seen, and his eyes seemed much older than they should be for someone who couldn't be more than 9 or 10 years old. Klaus approached the fence cautiously. He had never seen a child among the workers before, and he was curious about what a boy his age was doing in the work facility. "Hello," Klaus called out in German. The boy looked up, startled and clearly nervous. He glanced around quickly before responding in accented but understandable German. "Hello, I'm Klaus. I live in the house over there." Klaus pointed through the trees, toward his family's residence. "Do you work here too?" The boy studied Klaus for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether it was safe to continue the conversation. "Yes, I work here. What's your name?" "David." "How old are you?" "David." 9, almost 10. "I'm 9 too." "That's wonderful. I haven't met anyone my age since we moved here." Klaus sat down cross-legged on his side of the fence, excited to have found a potential friend. What kind of work do you do? David hesitated. I help with different tasks. Whatever needs to be done. That sounds interesting. Do you like working here? Another pause? It's not really about liking it. Klaus found this response puzzling. In Munich, people seemed to generally enjoy their work, or at least they didn't seem unhappy about it. What do you mean, Klaus? David said carefully. What do you think this place is? It's a work facility. Father manages it. Everyone here makes supplies for the war effort. David stared at Klaus with an expression that seemed both sad and surprised. Have you seen any supplies being made? Any products being created? Klaus thought about this. During his observations, he had seen people moving things and standing in lines, but he hadn't actually seen anyone making anything specific. Well, maybe the production happens inside the buildings where I can't see it. Klaus, I need to tell you something important, but you have to promise to keep it secret. Of course, I'm excellent at keeping secrets. This place isn't what your father told you it is. Over the next hour, David attempted to explain to Klaus what Sobibor really was. But how do you describe a death camp to a 9-year-old whose father runs it? How do you explain systematic murder to a child who has been raised to see it as normal wartime operations? David spoke carefully, using terms Klaus might understand. People are brought here on trains, but they're not allowed to leave. Many people get very sick and don't recover. Families get separated when they arrive, and sometimes they don't see each other again. Klaus listened with growing confusion. But if people don't like working here, why don't they just find different jobs? It doesn't work that way. Klaus, maybe I could ask Father to give you a better position, or arrange for you to visit our house sometimes. David's expression became even sadder. Klaus, your father isn't the kind of person who would help someone like me. What do you mean? Someone like you? You're just a boy, like me. Yes, David said quietly. I'm just a boy, like you. But in this place, that doesn't matter as much as other things. What other things? The reason I'm here, Klaus, is because I'm Jewish. Klaus had heard the word Jewish before in the serious conversations adults had about the war, but he wasn't entirely sure what it meant in practical terms. Is that why you have to live at the work facility? Something like that? But you're just a child. What does being Jewish have to do with work? That's a very good question, Klaus. I wish I had a good answer. That conversation marked the beginning of what would become both the most important and most tragic friendship of Klaus's young life. Klaus began visiting David at the fence every afternoon when he could slip away unnoticed. They talked about their lives before Sobibor, Klaus's adventures in Munich, David's memories of his family's small house in Warsaw. They discussed books Klaus had read David missed reading more than almost anything, games they had played, and dreams they had for after the war ended. Klaus brought food from his house, bread, apples, sometimes chocolate, sharing it through the fence wire. David was always grateful and always hungry, which Klaus found concerning. Don't they feed the workers properly here? Klaus asked one day. The food isn't very good, David replied diplomatically, and there isn't always enough of it. That seems inefficient. Workers need proper nutrition to be productive. I should mention it to Father. Please don't tell your father about me, David said urgently. Promise me you won't tell anyone. Why not? Because I'm not supposed to talk to people from outside the work area. It's against the rules. Klaus agreed to keep their friendship secret, though he couldn't understand why such a rule would exist. In his experience, friendship was always positive. Why would anyone object to two boys being friends? As weeks passed, Klaus began noticing inconsistencies in his understanding of Sobibor. The smell that sometimes carried on the wind, acrid and disturbing, unlike anything from his experience of normal work facilities. The way his mother had become quieter and more withdrawn, often staring out windows with expressions Klaus had never seen before. The sounds that sometimes woke him at night, not the sounds of productive work, but something else he couldn't identify. During their conversations, Klaus learned about David's family. His father had been a teacher before they were brought to Sobibor. His mother had worked in a bakery. He had a younger sister named Rachel who was only 6 years old. Where are they now? Klaus asked. I don't know, David said. When we arrived, men were separated from women and children. I haven't seen them since. But they must be working in different sections of the facility. Father could help you find them. I don't think so, Klaus. Why not? David looked toward the smoking chimneys visible in the distance. I think they might not be here anymore. Where would they go? I don't know. Just ... away. Klaus didn't understand what David meant, but he could see that talking about his family caused his friend great sadness. So Klaus would change the subject to happier topics, stories about his pet dog back in Munich, descriptions of Christmas celebrations, plans for adventures they might have after the war. But as autumn progressed into winter, David seemed to become thinner and weaker. Sometimes he was too ill to meet Klaus at the fence. Other times, he had injuries that he couldn't adequately explain. What happened to your hand? Klaus asked one day, noticing bandages. I heard it while working. That's a serious injury for work. What kind of tasks are they having you do? Different things? Heavy lifting sometimes? Klaus found it disturbing that a 9-year-old boy was being required to do heavy labor that resulted in injuries. But whenever he suggested speaking to father about improving working conditions, David became anxious and insisted that Klaus should never mention their friendship to anyone. It was during one of these conversations that Klaus made a decision that would change everything. David, I want to help you find your family. What do you mean? I could come to your side of the fence. I could help you look for them in the different work areas. Klaus, no. You absolutely cannot come over here. But I'm the commandant's son. No one would stop me or hurt me. You don't understand. This place is different for people like me. But you're just a boy, like me. That doesn't matter here. Klaus, despite David's protests, Klaus became fixated on the idea of helping his friend. He had never been denied anything he truly wanted, and the concept of helping David find his family seemed both achievable and morally necessary. Klaus spent several days studying the fence, looking for places where the wire might be loose or where he might be able to crawl underneath. He found a section near a drainage ditch where erosion had created a small gap beneath the wire. On February 14, 1943, Klaus made the decision that would end both boys' lives. I'm going to help you, Klaus announced when he reached their usual meeting spot. Klaus, please don't do this. We're friends. Friends help each other. This is different. How is it different? David looked at Klaus with profound sadness. Because you're on that side of the fence, and I'm on this side. And that difference means everything here. But fences are just barriers. They're not real. For you, maybe the fence isn't real. For me, it's the most real thing in the world. Klaus crawled under the fence despite David's desperate protests. For the first time since their friendship began, both boys stood on the same side of the wire. Klaus was shocked by how frail David had become, how his striped uniform hung loose on his diminished frame, how slowly he moved. Now we can search for your family together, Klaus said. Klaus, we need to get you back to your side immediately. Why? I'm the commandant's son. No one will harm me. But before David could explain, they heard voices approaching adults giving sharp orders. The sound of many people moving in formation. David grabbed Klaus's arm. We have to hide, David whispered urgently. Why hide? Let's just explain who I am. There's no time to explain. The boys were swept up in a group of workers being moved from one area of the camp to another. In the confusion and chaos, no one noticed that one of the children didn't belong there. Klaus tried to call out his identity, but his voice was lost in the noise and commotion. Klaus found himself in a crowd of people, all wearing striped uniforms, all moving toward one of the buildings he had observed from his bedroom window, but never seen up close. David? Klaus whispered. What's happening? I don't know, David whispered back. Though Klaus could see in his friend's eyes that he understood exactly what was happening, and that it was terrible. The group was directed into a large building with concrete walls. The doors closed behind them with finality. In the darkness that followed, Klaus reached for David's hand. I'm scared, Klaus whispered. It's okay, David whispered back. We're together. And they were together when everything ended. Commandant Weber discovered his son's absence during the evening meal when Klaus failed to appear at the dinner table. Search parties were organized immediately. Every building on the compound was searched. Dogs were brought in to track Klaus's scent. They found Klaus's jacket near the fence where he had left it before crawling under the wire. It took 2 days to piece together what had happened. 2 days during which Commandant Weber experienced a fraction of the anguish that thousands of parents had felt when their children disappeared into the machinery of the final solution. When the truth was finally understood that Klaus had somehow become mixed up with a group being processed through the facility, Weber faced a reality that destroyed his entire worldview. His son, a German child, had died in the same manner as the Jewish children that Weber had been systematically murdering for months. Klaus had experienced the same fear, breathed the same gas, died the same death as the children Weber had deemed expendable. Weber found Klaus's hidden diary in the garden shed, where the boy had been recording his thoughts about his friendship with David. The final entry, written the night before Klaus's death, read, David is my best friend even though we have to talk through a fence. Tomorrow I am going to help him find his family because that's what friends do for each other. I know father says the work area is dangerous, but David is there every day, and he's just a boy like me. I think when father meets David, he will understand that some rules are more important than other rules. Being a good friend is more important than staying on the safe side of a fence. Klaus's story became a reminder that evil destroys both its intended victims and, ultimately, those who serve it. But Klaus's story also demonstrates that innocence can recognize humanity even when taught to see it as other, and that friendship can transcend the barriers adults create. David's story represents the 1.5 million children who died in the Holocaust. Children with names, families, dreams, and futures that were stolen from them. Children who, like David, showed courage and kindness even in unimaginable circumstances. When we remember the Holocaust, we must remember both Klaus and David. Klaus, whose innocence couldn't survive in a world built on hatred, but whose final act was one of love. And David, whose humanity shone through even in the darkest place on earth. The fence between them represented more than wire and posts. It represented ideology, prejudice, and the systematic dehumanization that makes genocide possible. But Klaus crawled under that fence, choosing friendship over safety, love over fear, humanity over ideology. Today, Sobibor is a memorial site where people come to remember and to promise never again. Klaus and David's story reminds us that children can teach adults about humanity, that friendship recognizes no boundaries, and that love is stronger than hate, even when hate wins in the end. So I ask you, in a world that still builds fences between people, what would you choose? Would you stay on the safe side, or would you crawl under the wire to stand with a friend? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about times when you chose friendship over fear, or when someone showed you kindness across a divide. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Vaulted Secrets. We remember the stories that must never be forgotten. Honor the victims who must never be nameless, and learn the lessons that must never be ignored. Because some friendships are too important to forget, some lessons are too vital to ignore, and some stories must be told so that the fences between us never become walls. Thanks for watching, and remember, in a world that builds barriers, be the one who finds a way through. This story is dedicated to the memory of all children who died in the Holocaust, and to the hope that their stories will ensure such evil never happens again.